Last week, we talked about energy, focusing on chemical energy in the cell called ATP. As we know, energy is very important in a cell, and autotrophs, photosynthetic organisms, bring in light energy to power cell processes. In this process of photosynthesis, we'll see how autotrophs take in light energy from the sun and use it to produce sugars. So photosynthesis, we know, is a very important process. So why is it important? So what is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is the process by which autotrophs, so photosynthetic organisms, convert sunlight or light energy, sometimes called solar energy, into usable energy. That usable energy is stored in food. So we know sugar, glucose, carbohydrates is stored energy that our bodies can break down to release energy. Photosynthesis produces that sugar. We know light energy is harvested by these organisms, and here is what they are taking in and releasing. This is an overview of the entire process. So we know that photosynthesis mainly occurs in the leaf, and we also know the layers of the leaf where photosynthesis occurs. Notice the arrows in this picture. Most of them indicate easily what enters and leaves the cell. In the case of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is brought in. We know that enters through the stoma or stomata on the bottom of the leaf, the opening between the guard cells. Light energy hits the leaf and is collected by those photosynthetic cells of the palisade and spongy layers of the mesophyll. Water is taken up from the roots and carried to the leaf by the xylem. These three are reactants or needs for photosynthesis. Notice oxygen is released as a byproduct of the process. It's one of the two products. It's considered a byproduct. This is released through the stomata on the underside of a leaf. Sugars are also made. This is the gold product of photosynthesis. Those sugars are sent to other parts of the plant by the xylem down the vein. Notice the overall equation. Carbon dioxide, water, light energy. These would be the reactants or the needs. Glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen. These are the products. So light energy that is collected by the plant is considered visible light, or energy from the sun, solar energy. So energy comes in three forms that organisms depend on. So light energy from the sun, chemical energy to power cell processes in the form of ATP, and then of course heat energy. We know light waves carry energy. Think of a hot pavement, for example. The reason that pavement is hot is because the light energy has hit that pavement, so it warms that pavement. Photosynthetic organisms can use that light energy to produce their food, and this is, of course, the process of photosynthesis. So the visible spectrum of light is what provides that light energy. So think of the rainbow of light. These wavelengths of light come in a variety of colors, so red through purple or violet. And these wavelets of light sometimes are absorbed by the plant, but others are reflected. So the reds and blues, that's what actually is absorbed by the plant, while the green is reflected. That green that's reflected is what meets our eye, and that's what gives the color of the plant. The chlorophyll is the pigment inside the chloroplast, so it's actually in these little discs that we will talk about, that reflects green light but absorbs red and blue. We've already looked at the leaf structure. Notice this image here shows you a really nice image of the leaf. So here's our upper epidermis, our palisade layer, our spongy layer, the lower epidermis. And here is actually one of the veins. Our picture looked more like this, and we can see those same layers here. Remember, the photosynthetic layers are the palisade layer and the spongy layer. Notice the stoma or stomata between the guard cells allows gas exchange to occur. And here's an image of that stoma again. So here are the guard cells on the either side, and in between we see the stomata or the stoma, which is the gas exchange opening. So if we look at this leaf at a little bit different perspective, we can see it's a little clear image here because it's computer generated, but we have our palisade layer, our spongy layer. And within the spongy layer and the palisade layer, we have lots and lots of chloroplast, the organelle for photosynthesis. Within the chloroplast, we have these discs. It's a whole intermembrane system within the chloroplast for collecting light energy from the sun and producing chemical energy to power the next step. On the bottom of the leaf, we have the guard cells and the stomata. That would be represented right here and here. So we know photosynthesis is happening in the leaf of a plant. That's where the large majority of photosynthesis happens. We know that it happens in the palisade layer, the upright cells, and the spread out spongy layer of the leaf. So notice our image here. These are each plant cells that would be found in a leaf. And notice the green circles within those plant cells. Those are the chloroplasts, many chloroplasts of those plant cell leaves. Remember, photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplasts. We have lots of chloroplasts in a leaf cell. There are chloroplasts elsewhere in a plant, but they are in very high numbers. They are very abundant in the leaf. This is the large majority of the location of photosynthesis in a leaf. Remember, chloroplasts have pigments called chlorophyll, which is a light-absorbing pigment. So it absorbs light energy from the sun so that the plant can transform that energy into a form that it can use. So the chloroplast has a couple of parts, as you saw. We do have an outer membrane as well as an inner membrane. So this is like a double layer of membrane for the chloroplast. Inside, we have these individual discs. They kind of look like a stack of quarters. Each disc is called a thylakoid. And then surrounding the discs, we have what's called stroma. Stroma, don't confuse this with stoma, but stroma is a fluid, much like cytoplasm, but it's found within the chloroplast and surrounding the thylakoid. The thylakoid and the stroma, I would say, are the two most important parts of this structure for us to know, because it would be the location of the two steps of photosynthesis. So the thylakoid, we'll start with this. It's a whole intermembrane system. So we have all of these discs, and we have a stack of discs, and then these discs are connected to each other. This is where step one, or part one, of photosynthesis happens. Step one, or part one of photosynthesis, is called the light reactions, or the light-dependent reactions. It depends on this portion of the chloroplast collecting light energy from the sun, or solar energy. So like I said, they look like a little stack of quarters or maybe a stack of pancakes, and that's what's going to contain the chlorophyll pigment for absorption of light energy. The stroma, oh, by the way, the stacks are called granum. So an individual thylakoid is a disc, and then a stack of thylakoids is called grana or granum, singular versus plural. The stroma, on the other hand, is a gel-like substance. So that would be comparable to our cytoplasm of a cell, except it's inside the chloroplast surrounding the thylakoid. And this is important because that's where the second part of photosynthesis happens, which is called the Calvin cycle, or often referred to as the light-independent reactions. So you're asked to label your chloroplast in your notes, so please make sure you have the labels for each of those pieces as well as their functions. Chlorophyll, remember, is a pigment, which means it's a molecule. So it does a good job of absorbing light energy from the sun, and those chlorophyll molecules can be found all along the membranes of our thylakoid in the chloroplast. Again, this is the picture of the chloroplast with our thylakoid, stroma, inner membrane, outer membrane, and granum, which you're asked to label. Photosynthesis, as we know, has reactants and products, and we write this as a chemical equation. Again, follow the arrows in our image to help us figure out the needs, which would be the reactants, and the products, what are made. So notice CO2 is needed, that enters the leaf. Water is needed, that enters the plant through the roots. And sunlight is needed. This is considered solar energy. All of these would be considered the reactants, so please note that these are the reactants. Our products are sugar, which is C6H12O6, noted by glucose in our image, notice the arrow leaving, as well as oxygen. Even though we have sugar and oxygen produced, please note that sugar is the gold product of photosynthesis. The fact that oxygen is produced, it is a byproduct. It is not a needed product by the plant for this process, so it is released from the process. We just happen to benefit very much from the process releasing oxygen. Remember that ATP is an important molecule. So this is just a quick overview of that cycle of ATP to ADP and back to ATP. It's important the molecule can use ATP, and then when it breaks it apart, that ADP molecule can be made into ATP again. So it's a continual cycle. Remember, ATP is chemical energy to power the cell's processes, power cellular work. We break the bond between the phosphate groups in ATP to release energy. By default, ADP is released. ADP, however, has the ability to accept more energy to form ATP and store that for further use. This cycle is very important because it allows the cell to maintain its energy amount in the cell, the levels of energy in the cell, and also makes the cell very efficient. We're going to see that photosynthesis produces some ATP in step 1 to power step 2. So there are 2 overall steps of photosynthesis. The first one occurs in those thylakoids, as we said, and it is called the light reactions or light-dependent reactions. The reason it is referred to as the light-dependent reactions is because it actually depends on the presence of the sun. It requires solar energy to hit those leaves and the thylakoid membrane. Part 2 is called the Calvin cycle. This does not require the sun, so it is often referred to as the light-independent reactions. It used to be called the dark reactions. Not because it can't happen in the light, it just doesn't use it. So the Calvin cycle occurs outside the thylakoids in the stroma, that solution inside the chloroplast, and it can happen in the presence of the sun or in the absence of the sun because it does not use light energy. Remember, it is the light-independent reactions.